Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to know a killer was watching, but no one knew who he was? Imagine turning on the evening news and hearing another murder, then another, and another, not committed by a man desperate to hide, but by someone who wanted the entire country to know his name. A killer who didn't just take lives. He wrote letters, he mocked the police, he challenged the newspapers, and he left behind cryptic codes that even decades later continue to fascinate investigators around the world. More than 50 years have passed. Technology has transformed the way crimes are solved. DNA has closed countless cold cases. Yet this one, it still refuses to reveal the truth. Because despite thousands of suspects, millions of dollars spent, and one of the largest investigations in American history, the Zodiac Killer was never identified, or at least, never proven. Tonight, we are going back to where the nightmare began, not with a famous letter, not with a coded message, but with two young people who had no idea they were about to become part of one of America's darkest mysteries. December 20th, 1968. Northern California looked peaceful. Christmas was only a few days away. Families were decorating their homes. Holiday music filled shopping centers. Teenagers were planning winter break. It felt like any other quiet December evening. Just outside the small town of Berryessa, two teenagers sat together inside a parked car on a lonely road known as Lake Herman Road. They weren't criminals. They weren't running from anyone. They were simply spending time together, like thousands of young couples across America. The couple was 17-year-old David Faraday and 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen. No one could have imagined that within minutes, their names would become forever linked to one of the most infamous unsolved murder cases in American history. Sometime after 11 p.m., someone approached their car. What happened next remains one of the most chilling moments in American criminal history. There was no warning, no argument, no robbery, just sudden violence. When police officers arrived, the quiet road had become a crime scene. David Faraday had been fatally shot near the car. Betty Lou Jensen had tried to run, but she never made it to safety. The attacker had disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind almost nothing. No eyewitness, no clear motive, very little physical evidence. For investigators, it looked like a tragic but isolated crime. At least, that's what everyone believed, because no one yet knew that this was only the beginning. The killer would strike again, and next time, he wouldn't stay silent. For weeks, detectives searched every possible lead. They interviewed friends, neighbors, hunters who had driven along Lake Herman Road that night, anyone who might have seen something unusual. But every lead ended the same way. Nothing. There was no clear suspect, no known motive, no witnesses who could identify the killer, only unanswered questions. As the weeks turned into months, the investigation slowly lost momentum. Many investigators believed the murders were a tragic but isolated crime. They had no reason to believe the killer would ever strike again. Then, nearly 27 months later, on the night of July 4th, 1969, everything changed. While fireworks lit up the skies across America, 22-year-old Darlene Ferrin and 19-year-old Michael Mageau drove to a quiet parking area at Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo. It was a familiar place for young couples. Peaceful, dark, far away from the crowds. Shortly before midnight, another car entered the parking lot. It stopped for a moment, then drove away. Michael later told investigators that he thought nothing of it. A few minutes later, the same car returned. This time, it parked behind them. The driver stepped out, holding a bright flashlight. For a brief second, Michael believed it was a police officer. Instead, the stranger suddenly opened fire. Bullets tore through the car. Michael was critically wounded. Darlene suffered multiple gunshot wounds. As the attacker walked back towards his car, Michael later recalled that the gunman returned and fired additional shots before leaving the scene. This time, the killer made a mistake. One victim survived. Michael Mageau was able to give investigators a description of the attacker. It wasn't enough to identify him, but it proved something important. The murderer was real, and he was still out there. Then, about 40 minutes after the shooting, a telephone rang inside the Vallejo Police Department. The caller spoke calmly, almost emotionlessly. He gave the exact location of the victims. Then he added something that stunned investigators. He claimed responsibility not only for the attack that had just happened, but also for the murders on Lake Herman Road months earlier. For the first time, police realized they were no longer hunting a single murderer. They were hunting a serial killer. But the nightmare was only beginning, because in just a few weeks, the mysterious killer would contact the newspapers himself, and with one chilling letter, he would give himself a name: Zodiac. Have you ever wondered what kind of person commits murder, then calmly sits down and writes a letter about it? Not to a friend, not to a family member, but to the biggest newspapers in California. Just weeks after the attack at Blue Rock Springs, newsrooms across Northern California began receiving strange envelopes. At first, they looked ordinary, plain white envelopes, nothing unusual. But inside was something that would change this investigation forever. On July 31st, 1969, 3 newspapers received nearly identical letters: the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner. Each letter claimed responsibility for both attacks: the murders on Lake Herman Road and the shooting at Blue Rock Springs. Only the killer could have known many of the details inside. Investigators quickly realized this wasn't a cruel prank. Whoever wrote these letters almost certainly knew exactly what had happened. But the most disturbing part wasn't the confession, it was the demand. The writer ordered each newspaper to print his letter on the front page. If they refused, he threatened to kill again. Not one victim, not 2, but an entire bus full of innocent people. Suddenly, this was no longer just a murder investigation. It had become a public crisis. Police departments rushed to verify every detail. Journalists debated whether publishing the letters would help investigators or simply give a dangerous criminal exactly what he wanted. Then investigators noticed each envelope contained something else: a strange symbol. A circle crossed by a simple set of lines. No explanation, no signature, just a mark, unlike anything they had seen before. And beneath the letters, the writer included another challenge: 3 separate pages filled with strange symbols, random characters, and mysterious codes. Together, they formed what would later become known as the 408 cipher. The killer made one thing very clear. He claimed his identity was hidden inside the code. If anyone could solve it, they would finally know who he really was. Across California, police officers, cryptographers, military code experts, and ordinary citizens all stared at the same impossible puzzle. Newspapers printed the cipher. Thousands of readers clipped it from the pages. Families gathered around kitchen tables, trying to solve the mystery themselves. For days, no one succeeded. The code refused to give up its secrets. But hundreds of miles away, a quiet school teacher and his wife were about to notice something everyone else had missed. And what they discovered would shock the entire country. The mysterious code had captured the attention of an entire nation. Police departments tried to crack it. Military cryptographers studied it. Even the FBI examined every symbol, hoping one of them would finally reveal the man behind the murders. But day after day, the cipher refused to give up its secrets. It wasn't a detective or a government expert who finally made the breakthrough. It was an ordinary couple, hundreds of miles away, in Salinas, California. A high school history teacher named Donald Hardin and his wife, Betty, spread the newspaper across their dining room table. At first, they weren't trying to solve one of America's biggest mysteries. They were simply curious. Like thousands of other readers, they stared at the strange symbols, looking for anything that made sense. Donald believed if the killer wanted his message to be read, he probably wasn't using a random code. He would write the way ordinary people think. So instead of focusing on the symbols, Donald focused on human behavior. He noticed that in everyday English, certain words appear again and again. Words like the and I. If the writer kept repeating common words, patterns would eventually appear. Hour after hour, Donald and Betty tested one idea after another. Most of them failed, but little by little, the impossible puzzle started coming apart. One symbol led to another. One word unlocked an entire sentence. Then, late one evening, everything changed. Donald suddenly looked up from the newspaper. The message was beginning to make sense. As more letters fell into place, a disturbing picture began to emerge. The anonymous writer wasn't asking for money. He wasn't demanding revenge. He wanted something else: attention, control, fear. Investigators quickly confirmed the Hardins had done what trained experts could not. For the first time, police weren't just hunting an unknown killer. They were reading his thoughts, and what they found raised even more questions than answers. The message revealed disturbing clues about the person who wrote it, but it did not reveal his name. The biggest promise in the letter remained broken. The killer had claimed his identity was hidden inside the code. It wasn't. Whether that was another lie or part of a larger game, no one knew. But one thing had become painfully clear. The person behind these murders didn't just want to escape. He wanted the world to keep looking for him. And as newspapers published the story, America became obsessed. Everyone had a theory. Everyone had a suspect. Everyone believed they might be the one to finally solve the Zodiac mystery. But while millions of people searched for the killer himself was already planning his next move.
As investigators worked around the clock, the letters kept coming. Some appeared to confirm details only the killer could have known. Others raised new questions, leaving detectives unsure whether every message truly came from the same person. With every new envelope, the pressure grew. Police departments shared information. The FBI reviewed evidence. Newspaper offices tightened security. And across California, an ordinary evening no longer felt quite so ordinary. People checked their locks twice. Parents worried when their teenagers stayed out late. The fear wasn't only about what had already happened. It was about not knowing where the killer might strike next. Then, on September 27th, 1969, that fear became reality once again. Near the quiet shoreline of Lake Berryessa, Two college students, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, were enjoying a peaceful afternoon by the water. It was calm, silent, the kind of place where nothing seemed out of place until a lone figure appeared in the distance. At first, he didn't seem unusual, but as he came closer, something felt wrong. His face was completely hidden. He wore a dark hood, and over his chest, a strange crossed circle symbol, the same symbol investigators had already seen in the anonymous letters. The stranger spoke calmly. He claimed he only wanted money and a car. For a brief moment, it sounded like a robbery, but investigators would later conclude that wasn't the real purpose of the encounter. After the attack, the man walked back toward Brian Hartnell's car. Instead of disappearing immediately, he did something unexpected. Using a marker, he wrote on the car door. He listed the dates of earlier attacks and added one more. It was a chilling message for investigators, not because of what it said, but because it appeared to connect multiple crime scenes to the same offender. When detectives examined the writing, they believed they were looking at another deliberate attempt to claim responsibility. The investigation expanded once again. Every new clue created even more questions. Who was this man? How did he continue to stay one step ahead? And why did he seem determined to make sure people knew these crimes were connected? Despite one of the largest manhunts in California's history, no arrest followed. The trail grew colder. The mystery grew deeper, but the Zodiac Killer wasn't finished. Just weeks later, he would strike in the heart of San Francisco, in broad daylight, in front of witnesses. And this time, police would come closer than ever before to catching him.
For weeks, investigators believed the Zodiac Killer had vanished. No one knew where he was. No one knew when he would strike again. Then, on the night of October 11th, 1969, the silence ended. This time, the killer chose a completely different target, not a secluded lover's lane, not a quiet lakeside, but the busy streets of San Francisco. It was a cool Saturday evening. People filled the sidewalks, restaurants were busy. The city felt alive. Just after 9:45 p.m., a 29-year-old taxi driver named Paul Stine picked up a passenger in downtown San Francisco. To Paul, it was just another fare, another customer, another ordinary ride. Nothing seemed unusual. No one watching from the outside could have imagined that this routine trip would become one of the most important moments in the entire Zodiac investigation. The taxi slowly climbed the streets toward the upscale Presidio Heights neighborhood. It was quiet, safe, the kind of place where people rarely expected violent crime. Then, everything changed. When the cab reached its destination, the passenger suddenly attacked. Within moments, the taxi rolled to a stop. The quiet neighborhood had become another crime scene. But this time, the Zodiac Killer made a mistake. A mistake that almost ended everything. Across the street, 3 teenagers looked out from the window of their home. At first, they thought they were watching an ordinary taxi parked outside. Then, something felt wrong. They immediately called the police. For the first time, witnesses had seen the killer. They described him carefully. A white male, heavy build, middle-aged, wearing glasses, dark clothing.
It was one of the best descriptions investigators had ever received. Police dispatch quickly broadcast the information. Officers across San Francisco rushed toward Presidio Heights. Sirens echoed through the city. Every second mattered. Then, only minutes after the attack, 2 patrol officers spotted a man walking calmly along the sidewalk. He matched almost every detail. He wasn't running, he wasn't hiding, he didn't appear nervous. The officers slowed their patrol car. For just a moment, the investigation stood on the edge of history. But something had gone terribly wrong. Because of a mistake in the initial police broadcast, the suspect description sent to responding officers was incorrect. Believing they were searching for someone else, the officers let the man continue walking. Only a few minutes later, the error was discovered. By then, the mysterious stranger had disappeared into the darkness without a trace. Many investigators would later believe this may have been the closest police ever came to catching the Zodiac Killer. One small mistake, one incorrect description, one lost opportunity that would haunt the investigation for decades. But the mystery was far from over, because even after escaping, the Zodiac Killer would continue to taunt investigators. And over the next 50 years, the search for his identity would lead to hundreds of suspects, thousands of tips, and one name that would become more famous than all the others.
The search was far from over. In the years that followed, investigators examined hundreds of suspects. Some were quickly ruled out, others remained possible. But one name would dominate the investigation for decades: Arthur Leigh Allen. Allen lived in Northern California. He had been questioned by police more than once. People who knew him claimed he had made disturbing comments. Some believed he even spoke about wanting to hunt people. Over the years, more pieces seemed to point toward him. He owned a Zodiac watch featuring a symbol that looked strikingly similar to the one used in the killer's letters. Search warrants uncovered weapons, explosives, and other suspicious items. To many investigators, the case seemed to be coming together. But investigations don't end with suspicion. They end with proof, and proof was always missing. His fingerprints didn't match the fingerprints collected from the Zodiac letters. His handwriting could never be conclusively linked. Years later, DNA testing failed to identify him as the killer. Some investigators remained convinced, others believed the real Zodiac had never been found. Then, in 2020, more than 50 years after the first murders, one of the Zodiac's most famous ciphers, the 340 cipher, was finally cracked. Not by a government agency, not by the FBI alone, but by 3 private code breakers working together from different parts of the world. For decades, people believed the message would reveal the killer's identity. It didn't. Instead, the decoded message contained more taunts, more games, more psychological manipulation. Once again, the Zodiac had stolen the spotlight without giving away who he really was. Today, the investigation remains officially unsolved. New DNA techniques continue to improve. Cold case investigators still review old evidence. Every few years, a new theory appears. A new suspect makes headlines, but none have answered the question that has haunted America for more than half a century. Who was the Zodiac Killer? Maybe the answer is still hidden inside evidence that has already been collected. Maybe the final clue is waiting for technology that doesn't exist yet.